Film number 47 is The Men Who Stare at Goats from 2009 with George Clooney. The reason this film is important is because even though it's kind of a lighthearted comedy, it is based on a true story. The true story of MK Ultra. MK Ultra is one of the programs that the American government used to experiment on American citizens, usually without their knowledge. In other words, when you make the government into something that becomes the controller instead of the controlled, which is what the Constitution said. The Constitution said we control our government. But when the government gets out of control, it begins to control and dominate and experiment on the American citizens whom the government was intended to serve. That's a problem. That's called tyranny. That is what the American Revolution was fought to put an end to. But throughout the late 20th century, the American government experimented on American citizens in a variety of ways. MK Ultra is very well documented. There's no conspiracy theory or anything there. There were lawsuits. It's very well documented. The main goal of it was mind control. And because of that, because they did that for real, you get a lot of these conspiracy theories and ideas. You know, things like Mark David Chapman was a Manchurian candidate created by the government to kill John Lennon and these kinds of things. And this is where you get these ideas. They're based on the reality that our government treated American citizens who they're supposed to serve and answer to, but instead they just looked at them as just animals, guinea pigs to be exploited. That's no different than Joseph Mengele did. Dr. Joseph Mengele in Germany, looking at Jews and gypsies and invalids and looking at people who he felt were inferior as nothing but little guinea pig animals that he can experiment on and do horrific things to. The Men Who Stare at Goats. The movie itself is just a lighthearted romp, you might say. But as you watch it, realize that this is based on a true story. Just one example comes from a video I did very recently. Oh, which one was it? I'm sorry, I don't remember the video at this point, but it was the timeline of American history that I put up there. Back, I believe in the 60s, in the early 60s it was, the U.S. government bought up the entire world's supply of LSD. Why? To use for experimentation on American citizens, usually without their knowledge. And the way they went about that in many cases was to give this horrible drug to academics in the cult of academia, psychiatrists, and say, here, try this on your patients and let us know what happens. Let us know if they go insane. Let us know if they kill themselves. Let us know if they kill other people. Just see what happens. Other times, instead, what they would do is get people to, when you sign your name, if you don't read the fine print, and frankly, it doesn't matter. If somebody wants you to sign your name, usually they have all the power. They have all the power. They've written into that document in clever language a way to get out of any kind of atrocity that they're committing, whether it's a student loan or signing up for a government experiment. That in the fine print says, oh, by the way, if you're killed by this, or if you go insane, or if you kill someone else, we're blameless, the government. It's all your fault. The Men Who Stare at Goats. You might want to watch it to get just a sense of what your government has been up to ever since these loony leftists took it over. Because loony leftists look at other people as just fodder. They're not equal human beings. They're not other people made in the image of God. They're just things. You can do whatever you want with them. And it's interesting because now that you have this coronavirus health scare, what are they doing? Huge propaganda campaign to try to get people And this isn't made up. You've seen this right in front of your eyes. I'm not making this up. There's no conspiracy. A vaccine that was created, and 1 or 2 months later they're talking about mandating this, and they're out there saying that this vaccine will protect you for X number of months or years, but it was invented 2 months ago. How do you know that that will work for a year when it was invented 2 months ago? Clearly there was no testing done on it for a year. How do you know that this vaccine does not make you sterile? How do you know that this vaccine does not create birth defects in your children or harm your progeny, all told? How do you know? When a government that has a long history of human experimentation and treating its citizens as just guinea pigs that they can play around with and destroy and kill, I'm not taking their vaccine. Neither should you. But only if you care about yourself. Number 48 is a wonderful John Wayne film, probably, in my opinion, his best film, from 1952. It is called The Quiet Man. Now, the beautiful thing about The Quiet Man, well, there's several beautiful things about it, but it's in part about the value of tradition. If you remember back in the movie Cars, when I talked about Cars, the traditions and the Americana that our recent ancestors built to define what America is versus all the nations that Americans came from. What is uniquely American? Well, we build our own traditions, and you have to maintain those traditions. That's what provides continuity from the first people there to you, and then going forward as you promote those traditions to your children. Well, The Quiet Man takes place in Ireland, and John Wayne, I don't want to give away too much on it. I don't think I'm giving it away. I kind of get into it early in the film. He was in America, and he was a prize fighter, all right, and he accidentally, during the fight, he killed his opponent, and it really affected him badly. So he moves back to his ancestral Ireland, and falls in love with a beautiful Irish woman, and in order to marry her, the traditions of Ireland have to be fulfilled. Let's put it that way. Now, aside from the fact that it's politically incorrect, which politically, it's a shame it has that word in, or the prefix in at the beginning, incorrect. It makes it sound like there's something bad about that. No, this is good, because political correctness is one of the worst things that's ever happened to our species. It's not a step backwards. It's not even a giant leap backwards. It's just getting on a rocket and shooting us back to ancient times. That's what political correctness is. It's shooting us back to caveman times, when someone else can control your very speech and your thoughts. Sorry, folks, that is not progressive in any way, shape, or form. That's the opposite. When he was in Ireland, he had to go by their traditions if he wanted to marry this woman. And I don't want to give away too much. It's a really fun film, but it shows those traditions very, very well. What it's known for more than anything probably is having the longest fight scene in movie history. I mean, like fisticuffs, hand-to-hand combat kind of scene. And that may sound kind of rough or something, or violent, but it's not. You've got to understand, again, the traditions. When you watch the film, you'll understand how that fits into it. The fight becomes an event for the whole community. It's something that draws everybody together, not apart. There's a difference between a fight and war. The Quiet Man, well worth watching, and realize that the beauty of those traditions that allowed those two people to come together and have a happy life together, that's what allowed that to happen. And when in America we destroy all these traditions, traditional family, traditional, I don't even want to say traditional idea of what a man and a woman is. I mean, that's determined by your XX or your XY. It's as simple as that. Everything else takes place up here in your imagination. Everything else. There's XX and there's XY. Period. So, watch The Quiet Man. It's just a great film, but it shows you the value of the traditions that these loony leftists want to destroy. They want to just raze it to the ground and burn it to ashes, so that we have no history, no attachment to our ancestors, no continuity as a culture. Why would the leftists want to do that? You got to ask yourself this at some point. Why? What exactly do they hope to accomplish? Number 49 is a film from 1980. It is called The Sea Wolves. Now this is kind of your, it almost comes across in a way as a late 1970s TV movie. But it's actually a true story about an event in World War II. Now the cast in here is phenomenal. Okay, they're aging and such, but it's a phenomenal cast. You've got Gregory Peck, Roger Moore, David Niven, and others. Okay, now if you're old enough to remember those actors, you'll know why that's so spectacular. The Sea Wolves was the true story of I'll let Mr. No Muffler drive by first. The Sea Wolves is the true story of an event in World War II. One of the ways, the problem, I don't want to get too deep into this, but remember how the leftists, they lie. And that's one of the problems with leftism. That's one of the problems with this radical left. Liberals. One of their tactics is to lie. And if you're lying, nothing makes any sense in the world. There's no foundation for truth or for anything. So liars are a huge danger. They're just a weapon against humanity. Well, one of the lies they told in the last half of the 20th century was that Hitler and the Nazis were right-wingers. They just made it up out of whole cloth. I mean, National Socialist Workers' Party, that's what Nazi is. Hitler was a leftist. He was liberal. That's what Nazism was. And yet they sit there and they paint it as if it's the total opposite, you see? Because leftists and liberals lie, that's just part of what they do. They can't appreciate the truth at all. Again, they view other people as just fodder to be manipulated and exploited. And if you have to lie to them or cheat them, whatever. They don't matter. It's all about me. It's all about me. It's not about my role in society or in a family or in a church or in a community of some kind. It's just all about me. And everyone else out there has to serve my interests. That's what liberalism ultimately is. Because the Nazis were liberals, they lied. Now, when you're in warfare, people lie more often anyway. Deception is part of warfare. But when you take people who are inherently liars and you put them in a war situation, then the lies and the deception just skyrocket. Well, one of the things they would do in Nazi Germany is they would violate the standard rules of civility, if you can call it that were associated with war. One of those was that if you had a neutral country or a neutral harbor, a neutral port, then you do not engage in war from there. You keep it neutral. Keep the fight out of this place. This is a safe haven. It has nothing to do with the battle between this party and that party. Keep it sacred. don't bring your battle in there. But the Nazis, they didn't care. So what they would do is they'd bring a ship into a neutral harbor, and they would send out spies, and the spies would find out where all the shipping was to tell their U-boats, so their U-boats could destroy this shipping. And then they would transmit from a ship to let the Nazi U-boats know what's going on. So this ship in this safe harbor was working for the Nazis. It was a Nazi ship, basically, disguised as like a fishing boat or something. Well, the Allies, how were they going to take that out? In order to take that out, they would have to violate the rules. They would have to go in and engage in war in this safe harbor and destroy that ship, right? See, that's the problem with liars. That's the problem with cheaters. They create a situation where nobody can win. So, now the Allies, though, they don't want to do that. They don't want to go in and create war. So what they did was they actually asked an old World War I group of soldiers from World War I, who were now pretty advanced in age, if they would go in and take out this ship. So they were going to go in and take out this ship, basically a, like a special ops. Okay, but these were aging people. Now, they had done their service to their country their whole lives. They had no obligation to do this. And the interesting thing is, when they were asked to do it, they were told, you cannot ever tell anybody that you did this. You will get no recognition. You will get no awards. You will get no pay. And you might get killed. You can't even tell your wives. And all these guys said, sign me up. Sign me up. See, it's a sense of duty. It's a sense of duty to your country. A duty to something bigger than yourself. Again, something that liberals do not understand. The Seawolves is wonderful for that reason. You have these old gentlemen who have done their service in First World War. They had no business being in the Second World War, but they were legitimately needed in this case. And they got the job done. So it's well worth watching the Seawolves, because that kind of sense of duty, that sense of obligation to other people is being destroyed. The generation that's being raised there in Portland and Seattle and here in Minneapolis by these loony leftists, they don't have any concept of their role as one person in a society, and where their responsibilities and duties and obligations are not only to themselves and to their family, but to a much broader package as well. And that their duties are very well defined through tradition. It isn't something where Black Lives Matter, some ridiculous group that's formed 4 years ago, suddenly comes out and tells you how it's going to be. No, these are traditions that were established thousands of years ago as a part of human civilization. And the leftists are destroying human civilization. Film number 50 is from 1988. It's a documentary called The Thin Blue Line. This is from Errol Morris, put him on the map as a director. Now, The Thin Blue Line, you remember back in 1988, you of course always had documentary films, but you didn't really have many, if any, documentary films that were about a contemporary topic with the goal of creating some kind of a political or social change outside of the film itself. The Thin Blue Line is about a man who was wrongfully accused, wrongfully prosecuted, wrongfully convicted, and put on death row. And it rather clearly shows the corruption in all of the government. Remember, government equals random yahoos. Might be extraordinarily competent, might be corrupt to the core, probably somewhere in between. Government is nothing to be special. It is something to be looked at suspiciously and with fear at all times. This poor guy, who had done nothing wrong, he not only had the police and the prosecutors after him trying to get a conviction for their own reasons so they can put a badge on their shirt, put another notch on their belt. They had the expert witness come in, the big-brained academic. He comes in to testify And it was his testimony more than anything else that put this guy on death row. That expert witness, the big-brained academic, people called him Dr. Death. This guy would go from one trial to another using his so-called status as a so-called expert to basically put all kinds of people on death row. And the thing is, he didn't really seem to care whether he was telling the truth or not. Now, if you have somebody who goes into a courtroom and he's getting a bunch of other people executed for crimes they didn't commit, doesn't that kind of make the expert, the big-brained academic, doesn't that kind of make him a serial killer of sorts? His goal is to, well, who knows what his goal ultimately is, but his actions are putting a bunch of other people in a position where they're going to be killed. And yet, he's an expert. If CNN needs an expert, they're going to go through their little expert directory, and that's the guy they're going to call. And that's the guy who's going to sit in front of your TV screen and talk to you, and below it's going to say, expert. And he's going to tell you something, and then you have to decide, am I going to believe what this guy says or not? Have you been listening to Dr. Fauci lately? Been listening to any experts over the last year? With this coronavirus health scare? Been listening to any experts about, elections fraud? Been listening to any experts lately? The Thin Blue Line. A very disturbing but very important documentary film from 1988. If you haven't seen it yet, you should see it. But when you watch it, think about what it means. It does not mean you can't flip a simple switch. You can't come out of there saying, see, the police are corrupt to the core, we need to defund the police. That's stupid. Those police were corrupt. That prosecutor, that expert witness. You've got to look at each one on a case-by-case basis. But whenever you take one person and you elevate them above the others and give them some title like expert, you're playing with fire, folks. You are playing with fire. If you don't know where people get these experts, did you ever wonder where, kind of an aside, but very related in a way, did you ever wonder where this Michio Kaku came from? This Japanese guy with the floppy hair. Where'd this guy come from? He just came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, he's talking about science all the time on TV and in the media. It's like, where did he come from? What did he do? What did he accomplish? Kind of like Carl Sagan. You can't really find anything that Carl Sagan actually did in science. Can't find any accomplishment. Closest to it would be the idea of the greenhouse effect, which is totally discredited now. But, that's part of where global warming comes from, by the way. But, won't go into that. But where did this Michio Kaku come from? Well, you know what happens? People who have a big ego and they want to be on TV and they want to be a celebrity and they want to be known and they want people to look at them. They want people to know their name, and their biggest dream is that one day they'll be standing at a Starbucks and the person in line behind them will go, aren't you so-and-so? Can I have your autograph? But also, if you're known that well and everything, you're probably going to make a lot of money. Most likely, you're not going to be living in a car. So what they do is they get out of school, they get out of graduate school, and somewhere between then and X number of years later, they go and they register their name in this book of experts for courts, for the media. There's a list of experts, but the thing is, there's nobody who ever went out and found real experts and put them on this list, you see. Not for the courts, not for the media. What happened was they developed this directory by taking people they had been regarding as experts all along, they put them in a list. And then other people came along and started inserting their own names into the list. Oh, you need somebody who's an expert on astronomy? I'm here to help. My name's Michio Kaku. Puts his name and number in there. So CNN has an emergency. Someone said there's an asteroid 20 billion miles away from Earth, and it's going to hit California. Well, oh my gosh, we need an astronomer. We need an expert astronomer. Go through the list. Let's see. Oh, they're not available. Michio Kaku, let's try this one. Okay, he's available. Get him on. And the next thing you know, someone like that's on television as a, quote, expert. Nobody ever vetted him. No one ever figured out who he was, what he's doing. Now that he has that one It's just like being a film actor. Once you've got one credit under your belt, it's going to be easier to get the next role, and the next one, and the next one. And the next thing you know, you're going to Hollywood parties and you're at the Oscars. Show me what he's done. What science has been done by this so-called expert? All he is a textbook reader. He's reading back the junk science that he was taught instead of questioning it, which is what a bona fide expert would have done. The thin blue line, that's where experts like this come from, like Dr. Death, who is essentially, to me, no different than a serial killer, going around and using his expert status to get as many people thrown on death row as possible. And we'll worry about let God sort out whether they were actually guilty or not. Did you get your vaccine yet? The experts said that you should. Number 51 is a film from 1998. Fun film, many of you have probably seen it. The Wedding Singer. Oddly enough, again with Adam Sandler. What's going on here? Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore. The reason The Wedding Singer is on here is because, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. I graduated high school in the 80s. The Wedding Singer, even though it's kind of a comic book version of it, it is relatively good. It's very good, actually, at showing you what the kind of culture was like in the 80s. I mean, at least as distinct from the 90s or the 70s. The music, the dress, the manner of, the big hair, and all that stuff was there. It's just a good, fun film, of course. A love story, romantic comedy. But I wanted you to see that, to remember. For those of you who are old enough, it will help trigger that memory in your mind. The 1980s were the last time that this country had innocence. It was the last time we raised a generation of young people who were my age who still had patriotism, and we still had a healthy respect for God. We still had hope for the future. The kids growing up today don't have anything like kind. They have no hope. They have hope for a society that's going to collapse for so many reasons you can't even count them. Financial collapse, insane, stupid people running all these countries. Our election system was just destroyed 6 months ago, and it can't be repaired by definition. Because once you have one corrupt election, never again can any election be trusted. They might be legit, but you'll never have a way to know it ever again. All these things happening to these young people today, that's not a nice, innocent way to grow up. Coronavirus health scare, these kids having to wear these masks, prohibited from doing what a child is supposed to do, socially, not socially distancing, but socializing, learning social skills. So The Wedding Singer is just meant to remind you that the 80s were really, and don't forget, these loony leftists who took over this country, they had been at work for decades before the 80s. But in terms of it just taking over our society, taking away just sucking all the fun and joy out of life, the 80s was the last time that people growing up and adults could just enjoy their lives. They could watch Blazing Saddles. They could watch The Adventures of Ford Fairlane without a bunch of screaming, whining, utterly socially incompetent losers just, "Oh, how dare you! That's an insult against women and blacks and Native Americans and amoebas and horses and whatever. Boys are actually girls and girls are actually boys. We're all gonna die. Global warming." Watch The Wedding Singer and remember that was the Alamo of our culture. That's where we lost it all. Or I'm sorry, that's where we gave it all away. Because, again, 1988, that's when anti-smoking switched from being a 500-year-old cult, a hate group, to being an industry. Within 10 years, it was the most profitable industry on the face of the earth. 1988 is when that happened, folks. And as that triggered me to start seeing what was going on, the thing that struck me was, well, here's the person behind that, right on television. It's obvious what they're doing. They're lying. Anybody with half a brain can figure this out. The science bears it out. Everything bears it out. But nobody's stopping this person. And if we don't stop them, they're going to continue. And you're going to have others following in his footsteps. And that's what happened. They could have stopped it right then and there. And these people who are not stopping, say, a corrupt election where a duly elected president of the United States was overthrown in an act of treason. When people don't do anything about that, the consequences are going to be horrific down the line. All the signs of what we're going through here were just starting to come through in the 1980s. CNN. When you got to 1990, 91 with the Gulf War, where by that time CNN was nothing more than a puppet, a propaganda bullhorn, had nothing to do with reporting the reality of what was going on in that so-called war. That was the time we should have stopped it. But you know, it really wasn't up to people my age to do it. I was just a kid. I was just becoming an adult and learning how the world worked. But the older generation, they were the lazy bums who did nothing to stop it. Hey, what do you know? That generation, what were they? They were the hippies, the baby boomers. All the people who are out there smoking pot in the 60s, throwing away all the traditions. Yeah, they were the responsible generation in the 80s when all this stuff happened. And they did nothing. People like my generation were too young to understand what it was. I was one of the first in my generation to figure out, but even then it took me probably a good decade before I was really solid on understanding this. And I had a good education system. Today these kids have nothing. They have nothing to grab hold of. The Wedding Singer. Just to bring back a memory that America once was a wonderful place to live. And for those of you who are too young to have not experienced that, I'm telling you right now, growing up in the 80s, you always have problems. You always have things like bullies and stupidity and bureaucracy, corruption here and there. You always have that stuff, and we always will. But in terms of culture and freedom and tradition and prosperity and hope and just humor and even music, in terms of all these things, it was really, really wonderful growing up in that period. It was a good life. It was a pleasant, happy life. It was wonderful. And I'm so sorry to you growing up today that you're not going to have that. For 30 years I've done what I can do to try to have given you what my generation had. But my reward is to live in a car while the people who refuse to do anything because they're the lazy bums are out there running this world, living in the nice homes, and refusing to help people who are stuck living in cars. Number 52 is The Wizard of Oz from 1939. You know, when I grew up, The Wizard of Oz was on every year. And it always felt like kind of like a Disney film. I mean, I didn't read when I was younger, I didn't read more into it than was there. It's just a fun film and everything. But you don't realize how much it plants these ideas in your head, such as the idea that Kansas is a dusty black and white location. But if you go to Oz or maybe California, everything turns into full Technicolor. Happy, you know, not gremlins, but what were those things? You can't call them what they are anymore thanks to political correctness. You can't call them midgets, but I don't know. What was that? Leslie Nielsen, one of his jokes in the Naked Gun TV series, he said, he's talking about going through this case, and he says, like a midget at a urinal, I was going to have to stay on my toes. These loony leftists have destroyed the concept of humor. You can't say a joke like that anymore. That was on television in like 1982. I have to open the door because it's about 82 degrees in here right now. And I don't have a window that works, and I don't have air conditioning or a vent. The Wizard of Oz. Why would I bring up The Wizard of Oz here? Well, there's many reasons, actually, but aside from... young people growing up didn't see The Wizard of Oz every year like I did. It was just on TV every year. So you watched it repeatedly. And back then, you didn't have the internet. You didn't really even have VHS. It was just starting to come out, so you didn't have a big tape collection. So the idea of watching a movie over and over and over again was, limited to what you would see on TV. And there were only a few films that were played every single year. It's a Wonderful Life, The Wizard of Oz, things like that. You just didn't see... the classic films perhaps, but those are the ones that you would see repeatedly. Well, when you see them repeatedly, they start to have more of an impact on you. Hence, you get this idea in your head that Kansas is some kind of a backwaters dust bowl, in black and white, versus the real world, which is all Technicolor, which isn't true, right? I've been to Kansas. So, The Wizard of Oz, the main thing there is that these people were seeking something. They were seeking something that was going to make them complete. The thing that they were lacking. They were lacking brains. They were lacking heart. They were lacking courage. Much like the generation I just told you about in the last one here, right? So they go seeking it. And they seek to find it by having someone else give it to them. And when they finally find this great and powerful Oz, fire and smoke coming out, and huge, big-headed wizard up there. And, they're just all, oh my goodness, look at the power of this man. Look at the power he has. Surely he can give us brains and courage and a heart, and he can send us back home. Well, as you know if you've seen the film, that's not the case. He was actually the one who was going to, he was actually engaged in a massive deception. He was just a little man behind the curtain, pulling all these knobs and levers, using technology to build this huge image of himself that other people would see because they're staring at the image, which is like staring at an idiot box, staring at a phone all the time, or staring at a television all the time. That's what you see. The reality is this little man behind the curtain just pulling all these levers. And that's an important lesson. Most people get it when they hear that the first time, but they don't integrate it. They don't get it. Who is Dr. Fauci? Had you heard of him before coronavirus? Why does he exist? Why is he in our media? Why? Why is Michio Kaku in our media? Why? You're seeing the image. You're seeing the big smoke and fire. You can't go up there and talk to him. You can't go up and see, oh, is he shorter than me? Is he taller than me? What's his handshake like? Is it a good, strong, firm man's handshake, or is it some clammy fish thing like I had when I had the unfortunate experience of shaking Michael Moore's hand? It still creeps me out. I can still feel that fish in my hand. Well, the Wizard of Oz turned out to be just a man, but he did have power, all right. He had power. He had the power of technology to present himself as more than he really was. And that's why everybody's looking at this image. And they all said, you gotta go talk to the wizard. He's this big brain. He can do anything. Reality is, he was nothing. For all the times you've seen Adolf Hitler on television and all that, sit down one time and just imagine. Think about what it would be like if you're in a room in Nazi Germany and just Adolf Hitler himself walks in the room. Other than his nice, clean, pressed uniform, when he walks in, what's he going to be? He's going to be a guy who's maybe 1 inch shorter than you or 1 inch taller than you. He's going to be flesh and blood. He's going to take up no more material space than your body does. That's all he is. You're surrounded by 8 billion of those things. Why was he something special? Why could he dictate the terms of existence for millions of other people and dictate the fact that many millions of people's existences were going to cease? Why could he do that? He's nothing. It's because of the big image that he generated. Well, one of the films coming up here is going to tell you how Hitler did it. But how did Fauci do it? How did Kaku do it? How did Biden do it? How did any of these people do it? You see, the thing with Trump that they didn't like was that he was the real deal. He didn't put on an image. He was himself, and that means he put on the same kind of tweets that a Joe Biden or a Harris or a Nancy Pelosi would put if they were in an unofficial capacity. And many of these people have been caught. They've been caught with a second Twitter account or Facebook account, and there they speak like they really are. And you know what? They sound like Donald Trump. Sometimes they say something kind of mean and nasty. You know, they're talking like they do in the real world. They're not putting on this big image. But that's why they hated Donald Trump. Because he would go on Twitter and Facebook and all this, and he would be himself. You knew what you were dealing with. They hide it from other people. They wanted a president who would go in there and put on the diplomatic face and pretend, which is to say to lie and deceive about who he really was. The Wizard of Oz. I am so grateful that I grew up with that movie year after year after year. There are so many themes in there that help me to just plant the seeds in my mind of realizing things are not always what they seem, and most certainly people are not always what they seem, and especially people in positions of power and authority are not what they always seem to be. You want better intelligence? It's already there. You don't need a wizard. You don't need a doctor. You don't need some program that you see an infomercial for. Get to work on improving your own mind. It's already there between your ears. You want to have a better heart and more compassion for people? It's already in you. Stop looking to others to give it to you. Start developing what's in you already. You want courage? You want the courage to stand up against fraud like this? Like the coronavirus health scare or the global warming or Ilhan Omar? These people who use essentially terror to get what they want. If you don't do what I say, I'm going to accuse you of being racist. I'm going to cancel you. That's terror. That's terrorism. That's exactly what terrorism is. It's just not violent terrorism, although one could call it violence because it can still result in your death. You want courage? It's already in you. I don't stand up to these people because I went to the Wizard of Oz and he gave me courage. I stand up to these people because I had to find the courage within myself to do it. And the way I found it personally was to, again, you've got to look to a higher purpose in life. This isn't all about me. There's 4 million homeless people. When I stand up here, I am representing not them personally, but I'm representing the fact that I'm presenting myself to show you that I am competent. There is no earthly reason why I should be living in a car. And if that's true for me, you've got to ask the question, what about the other 4 million people? Should they be living out in a ditch or in a car? If you want courage, it's already in you. And if you want to go home, if you want to go back to the era of the wedding singer, if you want to go back to when we had hope and happiness and joy and humor, without some whining, moaning liberal just screaming and ruining everybody's party every time you even try to have any fun. It's up to you to click your heels and to take us back there. There is no yellow brick road. If you want that back, you and your fellow Americans have to take us back there. Number 53 is a film from 1988, the same year as The Thin Blue Line. This is called They Live. They Live is a cult classic, the definition of a cult film. There's people who've heard of it, and there's people who have not. That's about it. Those are the two type of people on planet Earth. People who have heard of and therefore seen They Live, and those who have not. Well, They Live was kind of like a very low-budget version of The Matrix, you might say. But the thing is, this is 1988, folks. Remember? Remember the year that anti-smoking switched from being a 500-year-old hate group instantly to being a profitable industry. Writing the playbook that would be used to manipulate people with junk science going forward for the next 30 years and beyond. Global warming, climate change, coronavirus, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Watch my junk science videos. 1980s is when the Berlin Wall fell, and therefore communism supposedly stopped. Supposedly. Didn't actually happen. The communists were infiltrating this country while we were being distracted watching what looked like the fall of communism elsewhere. They Live. They Live. Now, you might have heard reference to this. They Live is the film where everyone's just going about their business, perfect, just going about their daily lives and everything. But something just isn't right. As an outside observer, something isn't quite right. Because people seem really obedient. And it's not about obeying the law and traditions and things. It's like they're subservient. You know, for example, if something comes up that's unusual, they look to the authority to tell them what to do, and then they do it. They don't question it, they don't research it, they don't think about it, they don't behave responsibly at all. They just, oh my gosh, something unusual has happened, I don't know what to do. Let me go to my leader, let me go to my expert to tell me what to do. Well, in the film They Live, there were these sunglasses, and when you put these glasses on, you suddenly saw the world as it really is. You didn't see the image. And what you saw were a lot of people out there were actually not what they seemed to be. They were something different, something really spooky and really scary. But you only saw them when you had the glasses on. But not only that, when you had your glasses on, when you looked at the TV, you saw what was really there. You didn't see the propaganda machine that is manipulating you. You saw the manipulation. You saw the tactic. You saw what it was that this, otherwise just normal scene that you're seeing on television, you're seeing how it's manipulating you, how it's oppressing you, how it's changing you fundamentally. The glasses did that. I don't want to say much more because unfortunately the truth is it's just not that good of a film overall. But having said that, this aspect of the glasses and everything, and plus there's one of the classic lines in movie history in there. So much so, again, it's not the greatest film in the world, so I'm not going to tell you that line and spoil it for you. Sorry, I had to let Machine Gun Kelly there drive by. Yeah, watch They Live. That's all I can say. It's one that you have to watch. It was one of the first films that came out that was really warning us in the manner that The Matrix later would do so with such extraordinary, accomplishment. The Matrix was amazing. They Live was a low-budget, entry-level version of that, you might say. So you definitely, if you like The Matrix, you're gonna like They Live. Number 54, this is from 1990. Total Recall. Not the pointless remake, but the original Total Recall. With Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sharon Stone, and a great cast. All around. Directed by Paul Verhoeven, who, oh my goodness, he's just made so much cool stuff. And he puts so many cool things in there in terms of dystopia, again, especially the news media in his films. But Total Recall is about people who want to escape reality, and of course people have always wanted to do that. That's where alcohol becomes so popular, and drugs, and other forms of drugs, such as phone addiction, internet addiction, all those kinds of things. These things that take over so that you don't have to interact with the world, and they just become your little safe place, your security blanket. Total Recall was about, in the future where they would have what today you might call virtual reality, only it was, the real thing. I mean, they could put a helmet on you and literally implant memories of some event that never actually happened in your life. But once it's implanted, you believe that it happened because that memory is now programmed into your brain. Now, that may sound good on paper, but this question comes up quite often. It's going to come up in the honorable mentions. Would you rather live in a world that's real, that is? Do you want to live in a world that is what you live in? Or do you want, even if that world is uncomfortable, even if that world is dangerous, even if that world is unpleasant sometimes, would you rather live in reality, or would you rather live in some comfortable fantasy that someone implants in your brain? In Total Recall, you would go in and pay money, and they would implant a memory, maybe a night with a beautiful woman, or a whole vacation, as in the case of the story of the film. But what if people throughout your entire life are constantly, maybe not putting a helmet on you and literally changing neurons in your memory, but they're constantly brainwashing you and programming you with beliefs and ideas that have nothing to do with reality? Absolutely nothing existed. There was nothing. There wasn't even a void because there was nothing that existed. And then all of a sudden, that nothing went boom and exploded and became everything. That's the Big Bang Theory. I won't even go into evolution. I'm not even going to go into this. Smoking kills 400,000 people every single year. How many does coronavirus kill? Have you noticed that last year there were only, 2,000 people who were listed as dying from the flu? It's almost as if the flu magically disappeared, just flew away when coronavirus came on the scene. Could it possibly be that the people who died of the flu were logged as dying of coronavirus? Is it possible, or do you believe in coincidences like that? Or has somebody been programming you with a false reality? Just because coronavirus and the health scare associated with it is scary and terrifying doesn't mean that a lot of people don't want that big lie thrust onto them. Just like you could walk into Total Recall, you could walk into Recall and have something implanted that you would believe for the rest of your life because they literally rewired your brain. Don't think for a moment that there aren't a lot of people out there, and I will say right now, they are the worst people among us. They are the most incompetent, they are the most irresponsible, they are the worst human beings in our society. These people just want some sense of security. They don't want anything to not be known because they won't go out and investigate anything. They're terrified to learn. They're too lazy to learn. So even if you give them something that's horrific, like, I don't know, a Nazi party, the Aryan lie, if you give them a Holocaust, if you give them a pandemic scare, you can give them anything you want. But now these people with this story that's been planted in their brain, because they're so lazy and so irresponsible, they will not go out and interact with the world. They do not want any uncertainty. It terrifies them. They would rather have Fauci standing on TV and telling them what to believe. Oh, finally, I have an expert who can tell me what the truth is. Now, granted, he said the complete opposite a month ago, but he's an expert. He's the highest paid government employee in the United States of America, which I believe he is. So if he changes his story every month, it doesn't matter. I've got the safety and security of now this health scare justifies me doing what other people used to laugh at me for doing, which is to just blindly trust experts. Whatever they tell me, I will believe. And if they say to wear underwear on my face, that's what I'll do. Now I'm in a safe place. I have no responsibility at all. It's up to the saviors. And I'll just do whatever they say. That's just one example of a narrative that can be implanted in your brain, either through recall, where they rewire your neurons, or through broadcast media, where they just brainwash you. And you're so lame that you choose to accept that ridiculous lie. Where other people standing off to the side are just sitting there going, are you serious? You don't see the holes in this health scare? You don't see this? You don't see the holes in this mask, which are, if you put a microscope on it, 100,000 times larger than a coronavirus, which can just fly right through this mask, as if the mask didn't even exist? And yet you're still going to stick it on your face? Are you serious? You didn't notice that nobody apparently died from the flu last year, when normally there's tens of thousands who die from the flu? You didn't see the connection? Are you serious? Total Recall, a film well worth watching and thinking about. If more people had thought about this film in 1988, maybe we wouldn't be in the mess we're in today.